Long before time had a name and the mobile market had a real fighting game, a Russian studio called Nekki created Shadow Fight 2 using simple silhouettes and realistic animations. But when the game came out, a dark force sought to corrupt its reputation: microtransactions. So I, Nekko, a cat dude, sought out to prove Shadow Fight 2's worth and explain its legacy. So, funny Ninjago reference aside, if you've read the title, you already know what this video will be about, and that is Shadow Fight 2, a mobile fighting game created by Nekki Studios and Bonsai Games. And if you somehow don't know what Shadow Fight 2 is, to put simply, it's not just a mobile fighting game. It's the mobile fighting game, the one that revolutionized how it should be done on a phone. It garnered worldwide praise and became the most beloved childhood memory for many mobile gamers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To truly understand the significance of Shadow Fight 2, we need to start at the very beginning. The year is 2009, just a year after touchscreen phones were first introduced. Apple would launch the very first and now most well-known App Store, containing, well, apps. Fun little programs to play with on your phone, and during this time it was pretty simple and some weren't even games. You got the classics like Angry Birds, Jetpack Joyride, Temple Run, and then you got the non-traditional gimmick games like Office Jerk, Stair Dismount, and Talking Ben. So with many different games of different genres, a fighting game was inevitable, and some would find their way onto the App Store with varied results. And if I had to categorize them, it'd be into three types: the ports, the punch-outs, and the shovelware. Ports are pretty self-explanatory, basically replicas of actual fighting games from different consoles. Then there were the punch-outs, obviously taken from Nintendo's Punch-Out game, as these games use the same third-person perspective and simple controls. And just like the game it was inspired by, many of them would end up being boxing games because it suits the controls quite well, as you only need to tap to jab, swipe to hook, and then two buttons for blocking or dodging. Then last and not least, there were the shovelwares, basically games that tried to look like the mainstream ones like Tekken, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, but they ended up looking like this. There's many reasons why it was hard for a decent mobile fighting game to be made, but it boils down to three things: hardware limitations, different coding, and touchscreen controls kinda suck for fighting games in general. Additionally, the mobile market was practically new at this point, so there were no pioneers yet, meaning there was no base to get inspired by or copy off of. A good example of this was when Doom released in 1993. There was basically no first-person shooter before, so id Software had to code the entire thing from scratch. No studio wanted to put the time and effort into creating something that didn't exist yet. However, one fateful day in 2012, one company decided to take that chance and create something new, and their name was Nekki. Before Shadow Fight, Nekki was the relatively new kid on the block. They had just finished another game called Vector, an endless 2D parkour runner that used very realistic animations and silhouettes, which was kind of revolutionary at the time. So, hoping to capitalize on their success, they decided to take one of their old IPs and add it to the mobile market, which would be none other than the original Shadow Fight. Most people actually forget there was even a Shadow Fight 1, because the difference in quality is literally night and day. Shadow Fight 1 was made for Facebook games. It had the same art style and similar combat, but it was still pretty rough. So by using this as the base, combining it with their assets from Vector, and teaming up with Bonsai Games, Shadow Fight 2 was born. Shadow Fight 2, or SF2, was pretty unique in that it was both a fighting game and an RPG, with weapons and armor that could be customized and upgraded, complete with many modes to play in, and a really amazing storyline. Like, it's quite literally peak cinema because it's so good. Just take a look at the game's opening.
I broke the laws of the Elders and opened the gates. The demons of the other world were beyond them. They rushed upon me, tearing my flesh, draining my soul, turning me into a shadow.
And remember, this was just for a mobile game. So, with such a cinematic intro, the gameplay had to be good, right? Well, probably a first for the channel, this is the case, as is true. The gameplay is that good. At first glance, they look just about what you'd expect from a normal mobile fighting game. It had the same layout and buttons, and by combining inputs and the corresponding buttons, you'll perform a move based on what you did. However, this gets more complicated when you add weapons into the mix. In Shadow Fight 2, there are dozens upon dozens of different weapons to choose from, and each one having a unique moveset and effects, resulting in a lot of different ways to fight. There's long weapons with slow startup but big reach, and short weapons with smaller reach but quicker draw, so it offers a lot of variety to the players to pick and choose the one that suits them best. But by far, Shadow Fight 2's best main feature is the impacts. To utilize the realistic animations, the game emphasizes contact hits over the traditional juggle combos we're used to. Depending on the type of hit and the momentum, it can sometimes do critical damage, which causes the game to pause for a brief moment and shake, and as a cool touch, the phone even vibrates to add to the immersion. That's why it might seem slower than most fighting games, because it's completely intentional. Apart from looking cool, it's even a gameplay mechanic, as depending on the impact, you can sometimes knock an opponent's weapon out of their hand and put them at a disadvantage. As a result, you get a game that is all about range and spacing. Being able to predict your opponent's move and make the correct counterattack is the key to winning. As you master your weapon, you'll be able to know its limits and capabilities in order to use it in the best way possible. Certain weapons also have enchantments, which are basically specific buffs that can suit certain playstyles. But if you're the type that doesn't want to get close and personal, the game also has ranged weapons, which comes in two varieties: physical and magical. Physical are what they sound like: shurikens, knives, or kunais that can be thrown, with some even varying on which height they're thrown from. They can also be spammed indefinitely, but any smart opponent will know to just jump over it. Magic is the same thing, but it comes in many varieties. Most work like ranged weapons, but some can conjure flame pillars or summon asteroids from the sky, which have different ranges. This forces the opponent to approach you more cautiously. However, for balance, it has limited use. So with many features, abilities, weapons, and options to choose from, it made Shadow Fight 2 really fun to play, but most importantly, it solved the issues many struggled with. Since it used silhouetted characters, it allowed Nekki and Bonsai to get creative with their levels and features, since it didn't overwhelm the devices it was on. And since the gameplay was slowed down for the realism, it also solved the input delay problem. Most traditional fighting games are designed with physical buttons and a joystick in mind, not a touchscreen. So most of the time, inputs won't register and you'll whiff a combo that should have been easy with buttons. SF2's slow combat made it perfect for a mobile fighting game. And those who say otherwise, well, I have to say, that's perfectly fine and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Compared to other games from its era, it was in a league of its own. Like it should have been a AAA game from Xbox or PlayStation. From various different modes to play in, the dozens of weapon combinations and armor customizations, to the super cinematic storyline with deep lore. As shown in the intro, Shadow is tasked with hunting down the 7 demons for their seal for the gates, with the main boss Titan looking to take over the entire world if you don't stop him. Each character has their own sub-story for each arc, which would take way too long for me to go into detail, so I won't go over it in this video, but I might do a separate storyline video if this one does really well. Anyway, in short, during each act, you must defeat 5 bodyguards and the main demon themselves. And to level your equipment to face these bosses, you'll have to do the side content like challenges, tournament, and survival. Tournament is the first and most straightforward. You fight against a bunch of NPCs to get gold and XP. Challenges add a bit of flavor as now you have to fight them with specific rules. Lastly is survival, which is what it sounds like. You must survive 10 rounds with no losses in order to get the rewards. And while I say NPCs, they all look really cool, and the best part is, it's not always reused, so each act will always have new bodyguards, bosses, and NPCs to meet, which is nice. And all of these characters just add to the lore of Shadow Fight. And let me re-emphasize the lore, because if you look deeper into the game's lore, it goes pretty hard. Shadow is actually somehow a universal level being. Some say he's able to go toe-to-toe or beat characters like Dante from Devil May Cry and Kratos from God of War due to his feats alone. The main ones being defeating Titan, the final boss, who looks like a discount Thanos, but in lore he's basically a human Frieza. He conquered countless worlds before being stopped by an Earthling. Then there's Tenebrious, a multiversal being that created light and darkness in the Shadow Fight universe. And those are just 2 characters, but Shadow was able to defeat them easily. And I could go on, but I'm not here to power scale, although that would be a fun future video idea. Lastly, there's multiplayer in Shadow Fight 2, but I won't go into much details because it's not regular PvP. Instead, it's something called raids, where players from all over the world come to fight together against another external threat, the Eternals. Overall, it's not the main focus of the game, but it's a nice addition. Now that I'm done glazing the heck out of the game, there is something you should know. There's literally only one fatal flaw in this otherwise perfect game, and that's the freemium model. Now, there are games that can certainly do this right, but Shadow Fight 2 is not one of those games, and it certainly wouldn't be the last for Nekki. In-game, there are 5 bars of stamina, meaning you can do 5 fights before Shadow gets tired. You can watch an ad to refill it, but even that has a limit, so you either have to wait or pay to play. But that's not all. Since the game is half RPG, it relies on your equipment to be upgraded, which is possible, but it sometimes takes time, as some weapons or armor have some obligatory delivery time, plus some cool unique weapons are restricted to gems only. And as all premium currency goes, it's hard to get unless you watch ads or buy it. But with that being said, I highly recommend getting the premium if you're planning to play it legit. It's only $5 and it's a lot to some, because trust me, I've been there before. But for $5 you'll be getting a game that is really replayable, and it's also an offline game, so you can play it just about anywhere. And despite its only flaw, Shadow Fight 2 remains one of the most iconic and beloved fighting mobile games of all time. It was definitely Nekki's golden child, and while Nekki has gotten a bit more greedier over the years, especially with how many people have told me during the Vector videos how much the remastered was monetized, Shadow Fight 2 was a game made with passion. No other mobile fighting game put that much effort into its story or unique gameplay because there was no guarantee of its success. Regardless, Nekki didn't try to mimic other games or go the easy route. Instead, they simply worked with what they had and improved what they could to create a masterpiece that is sadly underrated, as the freemium model turned off many people who were used to normal fighting games. However, the game is still standing, as in 2018, about 6 years after its release, the game was recognized enough to be ported onto the Nintendo Switch. And honestly, it was everything everyone hoped for, and might be one of the best versions of SF2 ever. None of that monetization junk, no waiting time for equipment, just pure gameplay and more, as the game introduced a backstory mode for the sensei, and finally a real PvP mode. And to keep things fair, instead of it being level based, they just used the story characters and made them playable. All in all, Shadow Fight 2 was a shining example of the potential mobile games had to offer, and while Shadow Fight 2 is no longer in its prime, its legacy still remains. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm sorry it took longer than usual. I ended up procrastinating a bit and it was delayed by just a few days. Still, I'm quite proud of how this turned out, although while trying to get this done in such a short time, I probably missed a bunch of stuff, so apologies if that's the case, but you can always let me know in the comments. I'm always there reading stuff and taking recommendations. Also, please like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Even just a like will help my video get noticed in the algorithm, and I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers before the end of the month, so it'd be pretty cool if you help me out. Lastly, I also wanted to welcome a new channel member, Tomo, who you might remember as Boo Does Stuff. Tomo is actually one of my closest friends. I even made that raiding the pyramid animation for his birthday that one time. And yes, I still want to make that into an actual game, however that's gonna be on a long hiatus until I can fully support myself on YouTube. I also wanted to do another shout out to Catto, who was not only my first member, but recently upgraded to Cat Aficionado, one of my most expensive tiers. Words can't describe the appreciation I have for this kind of support, both to Catto and Tomo, and to you, the viewer, for watching this far and always liking my videos. You guys are awesome, and until next time, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.